everybody. Oop, is there a slight echo? Am I echoing to you?
No.
I think it was just getting ready. Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another Base Live. I'm Liz Prue, VP of Marketing at Base, and I am joined by my wonderful co-host, the head of product and co-founder at Base, Jeremy White. Hey, Jeremy.
Hey, Liz. Hi, everyone. Excited to be here.
I know I'm very, very excited for this, and I believe all of you are as well, because this is probably the most requested and commented about topic that we've had so far with Base Live. So I'm super pumped. If you're just joining, this is Base Live Agile 101, History, Jargon, and Practical Agile. Jeremy's a bit of an expert on this. So I'm setting you up here, Jeremy. You better deliver all the knowledge.
Deliver. No pressure at all.
I know, right?
Yeah.
But per the usual, guys, this is going to be very, very collaborative. That's why we host these. So make sure, whether you're watching on YouTube or in the Facebook group, drop any questions or comments that you have in the chat. We'll be putting prompts up on the screen as well. So if you have to step away or come back, you'll know what specifically we're talking about in that moment. If your question doesn't get answered in that very moment, I'm going to be monitoring the chat the whole time while Jeremy's walking through everything. So that way we can do a quick Q&A at the end and address anything that we didn't get to in the chat. I think that's all the housekeeping items that we have. I want to make sure we take advantage of most of the time we have here. So Jeremy, did you want to do a quick introduction of yourself? And then what we're going to dig into today?
Yeah, I'd love to. So for everyone that doesn't know, my name is Jeremy. I am the co-founder and head of product at Base. And for the last, 15 years or so, I've been leading and managing teams, building software, primarily software and hardware, some hardware and software-based products for multiple different organizations, and doing so almost predominantly or exclusively in utilizing agile methodologies. So I'm very familiar with the topic. At my last company, where we had multiple hundred people in our engineering org, I was one of the engineering leaders that kind of led some of the agile training, more than a couple of these books. I don't know, I'm pointing to the wrong side above my shoulder in my bookshelf are related to Agile 101 and different ways of applying Agile. So I'm really passionate about it. And actually the impetus for this call came, as Liz mentioned, from users within our private Facebook community that were asking for insight into Agile. And I'm interested in the topic, but I said, okay, well, if you're interested, please let me know. And if we get enough people who are interested, happy to talk on it. And we got, more than, 20 or so people who were like, yes, really interested in this. So I'm excited to nerd out on it, and hopefully it's interesting to everyone. So what we're going to be talking about is a few different things. We're going to talk a little bit about the history of how Agile came about, and I'm going to use a very personal example of where it works and where it doesn't work necessarily, just so you can understand when we're talking about Agile, what does it mean? What are the actual words associated with that, and where does it actually apply? And then in particular, I'm definitely I want to help people not get swayed by technical jargon and go, oh, this is the next best thing, and so this is what we should be doing. So I definitely want to help you, and knowing that the audience on this call is predominantly assistants, or in different roles, maybe chiefs of staff or some project managers and whatnot, but primarily assistants. How can you help those that you work with and those that you support, whether they be your executives or the teams that they represent, to not be just swayed or sold on a framework, and instead understanding how can we actually utilize these to accomplish our goals. And then the third is, what lessons and frameworks from agile methodologies can be applied to my context as an assistant. How can I utilize some of these concepts and frameworks in my own role. So that's where that's where we're headed today, and hopefully everyone finds value from it. So that's really where we're headed, Liz.
Awesome. Well, then, if you, since you're running the gambit here, I'll kind of minimize myself so I can monitor the chat and everything. And if you have any questions that you want to ask the audience, I'll make sure to put those pop-ups up and make sure that everyone has everything they need. But I'm pumped. Let's do this.
Yeah, giddy up. So, yeah, before I jump into that, I'll just say, as Liz was mentioning, we would like this to be collaborative. And so, if you have specific questions about Agile, or if you have experiences, maybe things that are going on within your organization presently or in the past that you'd like to kind of have me address, please drop those in the chat so that Liz can bubble them up to me, and we can try and address those throughout the call. Because I really do. I mean, I could talk about this for multiple hours, but I'm sure that would be boring for everyone. I'd love to spend a little bit of time talking about this, and then hopefully addressing some real world examples that you may have. So to start, as I mentioned, like Agile 101. So let's start on what is Agile. How did it come about? There's some of the history. So way back in the, I actually don't know exactly the year that it came about, but if you look back in the 60s and 70s and 80s, when software engineering was really becoming an actual thing, an actual field, right? Computer science and whatnot. What happened was, prior to this, you had, so software engineering, the word software, right? Like soft engineering versus hard engineering. I think there's an important distinction here. It's not that it's less important or less difficult, either of them, but they are different, right? So software engineering is a kind of like a soft science, in that we utilize these languages to build things, right? Like, and it is a structure, right? Like systems upon systems, just as a building is a foundation with a structure on top of it. But the difference with software engineering, and this is where Agile will come into this, I'll explain here in a moment, is the context of software is malleable, right? It is shifting. So I am able to write a program, even how we are streaming this to you today, right? Like, this is a piece of software that is then distributing into YouTube and to Facebook and different systems and things like that. But if I need to make an adjustment, I can literally go in and delete some code and start again, right? Like, the cost to change is minimal. That's one important factor when we think about this. The second important factor when we think about this, as we're coming into why did Agile come about, is that the context in which it exists changes very rapidly, right? So in hard engineering, so let's think like physics, physical engineering, construction, civil engineering, there are these forces that don't change, more or less, right? So you think about like physics, and again, I'm going to nerd out a little bit here, engineering and science part of me, right? Like, there is Newtonian physics, right? Like, which is like gravity and basically the types of forces that we interact with and we observe on a natural, in the natural daily, right? Those sorts of things. They don't change, right? Like, they're pretty much constant. The only major, one of the major shifts in the 20th century has been quantum physics, right? So physics and things that things beyond the visible spectrum that we can see with our own eyes and observe, right? And so for sure there has been some changes there, but generally physics and those sorts of things don't change. So these hard kind of sciences, they have these hard laws that you have to apply, right? And so when you were thinking about doing project management, and that's really where Agile came about, was how, like, the method of project management and development, going from a hard science, a hard engineering, to a soft science and a dynamic environment, soft engineering. So thinking about that, that's kind of the context in which Agile came about, right? And so back in the 70s, 80s, there was this group of developers that were operating with the tools that they had. And the tools that they had when software development first came about was, in particular, project management, was waterfall-based delivery, right? what is waterfall-based delivery? It is phases upon phases that fall down, right? Like if you've ever seen a Gantt chart, I'm sure many of us have. Basically, it's a bunch of lines that have dependencies linked one to the next, right? And so when you think about that, like, and there are reasons, right? Like, and I'm gonna share an example here in a second, right? If you don't do step one, and you then go to step three, right? You're going to have a problem, right? Like if you missed one of those steps in particular in a hard engineering sort of context, it's very costly. And these are some keys: costly to change, costly to go back and redo, right? And again, the context itself doesn't really change quickly. Now, contrast that with software engineering. It's easy to change, right? It's not necessarily so costly. And so the difference is in these hard engineers with long project life cycles that Waterfall works well in. If you miss one of those steps, it can be devastating to the process, right? Like think about building a bridge, right? If we spend 5 years and, $50 million, let's say, on this project, and one engineered thing is weak and the bridge fails, not only is the cost to human life potentially catastrophic, the cost of the project is huge, right? Like that's a really bad thing. So it makes sense to invest years and millions even in the planning phase before development. Opposite for software. So I'm going to give you an example of this, of where I, being a much more agile type practitioner, I tried to apply agile sort of to a project that it shouldn't have. So right now, if you can see my screen, there we go. Hopefully that works. If not, Liz, you can help me here. So I am building a garage. It's been my dream for quite some time to build a garage. I'm a car person, love cars, needed some more space, wanted to build a garage. So I've been building this garage. It's been now like a year and a half in the planning and the making. I have a bathroom. I built this bathroom into the corner of my garage so I don't have to come back to my house to use the restroom and whatnot. And it's just more functional. When the concrete was being poured, when the foundation was being laid, there were kind of circumstances happening around that, and I, in a very short period of time, had to decide where should the plumbing go, right? Where should the drains go? And so I told the concrete guy who was putting in the pipes, because I had like a 4-hour window to make this decision. I said, put it there, and then put the shower drain there, and then put the drain that goes for the toilet over here, right? Like kind of laid it out. I did have a drawing. It wasn't completely off the cuff, but I did not spend, lots of time doing exacting drawings. So now you're going to see the problem. Well, right here in the left-hand photo is what I ended up having to do to move the drain from where it was to where I needed to be. Well, why? There was a couple reasons. I didn't take into account the wall between where the metal frame came down and the interior wall that I was going to build, so it didn't look like a like kind of empty building. I wanted an actual wall. I wanted it to look nice. But those 4 to 6 inches made a difference, right? Like they made a difference. And so the cost to change and the effort to change was fairly high. I mean, not end of the world, like this was a small scale, but this is why hard engineering, you should plan more, right? Like don't be like Jeremy. Maybe do a little more waterfall engineering when you are building something physical. So I'm going to stop sharing here, but that's an example of where you really want to plan. So Agile came about in this context. So the problems that these software engineers were experiencing were a few. One, people were getting burnt out, right? Because they would build these waterfall projects that would last 24, 36 months. And this is very common. At month 30, we're nowhere near the end of that. And the budget, we probably spent more money than was planned. And so they will sit on the developers and say, you, like we call it the death march, you have to deliver this or you're all fired, that kind of scenario. So it creates this really bad circumstance for the people who are doing the work. That's one. And let's say the actual thing gets completed. Well, when it gets completed, 18 months later, the context may have completely changed, but we had these plans that were drawn up 2 years ago for what people needed, and we deliver it, and it actually doesn't make the impact that we thought it would, because people's behaviors have changed or the environment has changed, whatever. So that's a few of the things. So what they came up with was the Agile Manifesto, and the Agile Manifesto basically stated a few things. So first, individuals and interactions over process and tools. So basically people over process, working software, and you can replace that with like valuable deliverables, over comprehensive documentation. So essentially, actual valuable thing versus the talking about or the write-up about the thing. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. So essentially, let's build the thing that the people want. Let's make sure we're close and tight with those users, be user-centric versus be business, like completely business-centric, where we are just negotiating things because that's what some buyer wants, right? And then responding to change over following a plan, right? Like, we're going to respond to the feedback that we're receiving and what we perceive versus what somebody planned, a year ago, a month ago. These are the tenets of the Agile Manifesto. And again, they were meant to solve the problem of slow and ineffective project management in a frequently changing environment, and burning out of people. And so the key attributes of this, wrapping up this history lesson, but the key attributes of this are agility, right? It allows you to respond frequently and quickly to change. Sustainability, right? Being able to create an environment where people are sustained. You're not just burning people out and then having to go get new ones. Frequent delivery, right? Delivering something of a concrete value frequently. Collaboration amongst the team and a collaboration amongst those that you're building for, and continuous growth, right? Being able to continuously make things better. So that is like the context. That is what Agile like fundamentally represents. Now, there are a few different frameworks, and now we're going to get into some of that jargon part, right? Like, well, there are a few frameworks that fit within the Agile kind of manifesto and the Agile principles. The most common, I've heard new ones coming up, but the most common are two, Scrum and Kanban. Those are probably the two things that you'll hear most frequently. There's also a kind of hybrid called Scrumban. That's actually what we tend to practice at Base as our software engineering team. But fundamentally, they do the same thing. So in Scrum, you work in 2-week cycles. 2 week is the most common. You can pick whatever cycle length that you want, but the intent is short durations. Some duration, 1 week, 2 weeks, 6 week would be like a really, really long sprint cycle, but some duration where during this period of time, we are going to set a clear set of things that we want to deliver that have direct user value, customer value, right? And fundamentally, these should be written in the form of a user story, such as an assistant, not as Base, not as Jeremy wants to deliver this thing, but as an assistant, I would like to be able to send information about my calendar to my executive, right? Like something like that. That is in the form of a user story. So something they can concretely utilize and start to finish in that sprint, deliver it, right? Some set of work, so that you can now go get communication feedback from those users and say, did we meet the mark, right? Like, did we actually, like, did that solve the pain, right? Did that actually address the needs that you have? So you can learn frequently and you can pivot, right? That's the agile part of it, right? Like you can adjust without having had this long plan that maybe took a year and a half before you actually got in the hands of customers to find out, oh, well, actually, that's cool, but it doesn't really address my need. Or I've heard this frequently, right? Like we, even in our own sprints, it's like, oh, I thought it would work a little bit differently, right? And so that's actually not as valuable as I thought it was going to be, right? These sorts of things. So by doing this, you're able to respond quickly. Kanban is very similar. It's just it uses ticket in, ticket out, right? So it's actually better for even more dynamic environments, like where you are both operating the software and running the software. So if you don't have teams that are split and dedicated to each of those, like an IT, like a customer support team, very frequently is Kanban based, because what you measure is how long it takes for a single ticket to get out. It's called the tact time, right? So that's kind of your measurement, but very similar. It's just whatever is the top priority is the next thing we're going to work on. We are not going to work on the thing below that until this thing is done, right? So that way you can learn and get that. And by done, that means in the hands of someone who gets value from it. So these are a couple of the terms in there. I'm getting near where I'm going to ask for questions here.
Okay, good.
Should I stop, Liz? If you got things,
no. I don't want to stop your roll. You're on a roll. Okay,
well, I'm going to give just the rituals that typically exist within these, and then I'll pause. Okay, so the typical rituals that you find within Agile are a few, right? So grooming, backlog review or backlog grooming. This is kind of a weird term, but this is one of them. Stand-ups, demos, right? Like we're all pretty familiar with that. So, and then retrospectives. So let's talk about each of these. Sprint backlog review or grooming is a time specifically dedicated for individuals who are directly involved with the process, right? This is one of the big things about Agile is it's supposed to be cross-functional, let's say self-organizing, isn't always self-organizing, but teams of cross-functional individuals who can deliver on the thing, who are directly invested, not some external like executive who says you all should be doing that. Well, because oftentimes the people that are doing it who are closest to the users and closest to the work actually know the best way to accomplish that versus someone who's far away from it. So the people who are directly involved with it. So for example, very often this is the product manager, an engineering manager, or a tech lead, and maybe your designer will talk through the tickets that you wrote at some point before and say, okay, are these still relevant, right? Like, are these things the things that need to be done? Because honestly, we write things that sometimes they just no longer become an issue, right? Like either we solved the bug and we didn't know it, or we thought this thing was going to be important, but then we released it and we found out, oh, well, people actually don't really need that. So let's just not do that, right? It's not that important, right? There are other more important things for us to do. So you take this time to set aside and go, these are things we're not going to do. Here's the things that we're going to do, right? And you prepare that before you go into a sprint. Stand-ups are frequent, typically daily, short checkpoint meetings. The reason it's called a stand-up is because the intent is supposed to be fast enough that you could stand up and rather than sit down during that meeting so that you don't make it long. But again, it's for identifying blockers, identifying what you delivered yesterday, what you plan to do today, and then allowing for frequent agility in the midst of it. So like if, for example, maybe we have a ticket that we estimate is going to take 3 days, right? Well, we're working on it. And on day 2, the engineer goes, you know what? I don't think this is going to be 2 days. I think this is going to be 4 or 5. Now me as the product manager can say, well, you know what? Like when we had it thought of as a 3, it had this priority. Now that we know it's likely to be a 4 or 5, or maybe even worse, it's actually less valuable, right? Like there are things right behind that are only a 1 or a 2 that if we have to wait that long, I would rather do. So let's make an adjustment, right? Like that's the agility, and that's what stand-ups allow you to do. Quick, frequent check-ins. Demos are obviously just demonstrating the feature or the value. The best type of demo is actually not an internal demo. That is working with the user to show them and or putting it in their hands and you seeing from them how do they use it, right? So you can learn. And then finally, retrospectives. And that is fundamentally getting together on a some cadence. We do this every 2 weeks and say what went well, what could be improved, and what should we do differently as a team or individuals, right? To improve our processes, like thinking about what we're doing, how we're doing it, celebrating our wins, saying, hey, this didn't go so well, talking through that, and then taking time for adjustment. So these are frequent rituals that occur within agile methodologies, and they're kind of funny terms, right? So if you don't know them, you may not know what's going on. So I'm going to stop there. And Liz, hopefully people have been messaging in. I've been focused on trying to stay on track and thinking. So if we have any questions, I'm happy to address them.
Yes, guys, go ahead and drop any questions that you have into the chat right now. I'm looking through and we had someone, it looks like someone answered maybe. Someone said missed Kanban.
Yes, what about it?
They said, I missed it. What is it? And then someone did provide a definition, but we'll have you run through it again.
Yeah. Kanban is just, so Scrum and Kanban are the two most common agile frameworks to operate in. Scrum operates in very clear periods of time, typically in 2-week sprints. Kanban is a more flow-based system. So it is a ticket in, ticket out. Like that's kind of the most basic way of describing it. You work on the first thing, the most important thing, and you don't move on to the next thing until that is done.
Okay. A Facebook user would like to know, how would you recommend using this on a personal level?
Well, we're going to get to that in a minute, so I'm gonna pause on that. Let's see if there are any other questions. But that's a great question. I'm going to try and I'm going to try and give you some tips and ideas about how you can do that, in particular as an assistant. So okay. I see one question / statement that I can see out of my peripheries that said someone was saying that their teams struggle with being able to do their day job versus being able to focus on this type of whatever this other type of work is. So in the example of that, like if you're struggling with this or you have teams that have this kind of difficulty, the question is, what should they be doing in the first place, right? Like, what is their job? Like, how much time is being aligned to do that? And what are the other things? And I actually think, in particular, if you're an assistant or an admin, this is a great way to add additional value. Is you might even be able to look and say, let's talk through the percentage of time you're spending on X, Y, and Z, right? Like, let's do a calendar audit. This is something that you do with your executive. It's also something that you can do that you can coach or do with either an engineering manager or that team, and go, let's do a calendar audit and look at, are we doing too many internal meetings? Can we change the way that the days are aligned such that you have more time to be heads down and work in flow? Because if Agile is going well, you should not have that problem, right? Like that's one of the problems that it's intended to solve for, is being able to actually do your most important work. Now, it's not perfect, right? Like this is one of those things. It is not a silver bullet. Agile is not a silver bullet. I have actually seen I've seen organizations apply Agile, like waterfall deployment to Agile. Like, we want to make our company agile. So what do? They create a big long-term plan instead of applying the actual way Agile is meant to go. Is like, let's do small incremental things and kind of test and measure, right? Like a great way to do that would be to start with a team, right? Not go, we're going to change our entire organization. Everyone's going to do this, because you don't know what the consequences will be exactly, right? And so if you start with small, you can adjust more frequently. So yeah.
Okay. We have a couple, so that kind of trickled into this question I've popped up on the screen here about what length sprints would be useful for admins. And then Beth also asked, it looks like a follow-up to that almost. As an assistant, I have very little work that is project-based. So how would I use Agile to manage the work?
Yeah. So let's start with question one, and then if I don't answer question two, you can remind me, Liz.
Okay.
So what length sprints would be great for admins and working with your executive? It really depends, right? So it depends on what types of projects you're working on and what types of things you're doing. I think so. Here's one of the things, and I think this is how we can start to get into how to practice this in your own role, right? Like, um, what can you do to break down anything that is longer into smaller deliverables in which you can deliver them and learn, right? Like fundamentally, and so I think that even goes to the second test, even if you're not doing project type work, like what sorts of things can you break down into smaller things where you can deliver it and learn, right? So if you're working on a long-term project with your executive, is there a way that you can then think about breaking that into smaller chunks? We do this frequently in engineering, right? Like, let's go back to my original, one of the examples I gave as a user story, right? Like as an assistant, I would like to be able to share calendar event details with my executive, right? Well, if you look at that on the surface, it sounds pretty simple, right? But you break it down and there is actually like, well, we need to be able to get the calendar information. We need to be able to write more information about it. We need to be able to deliver that. Each one of those things are pieces that it can be broken out into smaller deliverables and say, okay, if we were able to deliver just that one thing to an assistant, would it provide some value to them? And can we learn from it, right? Like, that's it. Now, if we can do that, let's try and do that first before we try and deliver all of this stuff, right? Because the likelihood is we're going to learn something valuable before we get to the other things. And we'll learn that faster by doing so. So similar with your executive, I mean, again, it depends on what types of work you're doing and how long those sorts of things are. I think that generally, I would not want to go more than a couple of weeks without being able to deliver something that I can learn about, right? Like, so we try and deliver, I mean, we do continuous delivery. And so we're deploying new software to our application every day, almost, if not multiple times per day, as we find things or people discover things or tell us, give us feedback, and we make adjustments, which gives us the opportunity to learn frequently. So I know that was a non-answer to your question, because the answer is it really depends. But I would try and think about like, what types of things are you doing and how can you break those into smaller increments that you can deliver and learn from faster?
Yep, I think that answered that second part of the question.
Okay.
We have a couple more questions before we move on, and I'm keeping track of the time here too. Someone on Facebook would like to know, is there a value to becoming Scrum Master certified if you aren't already doing so in your work world?
Yes and no. It probably depends, right? I don't think that I personally think that a lot of certifications companies are there to sell you certifications. So I'm probably a little bit jaded, but I like Scrum, like understanding how to implement Scrum is a very valuable skill, right? Like it's a valuable skill depending on where you want to go in your own career. I've worked with some really, really talented and helpful Scrum Masters, even in my own, like being pretty proficient in Agile. There was a lady named Lisa Tierney that I worked with at a previous role who was an excellent Agile practitioner, and I learned a lot from her in how to apply this in different team types and things like that. So I think that there's definitely value depending on where you want to go in your career. Yeah.
Awesome.
Okay, well, while you maybe look for another question, Liz, I did want to say a couple of things as it relates to Agile in practice.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I think that there's a couple. One is focus on outcomes versus outputs. This seems simple, but I find very frequently people focus on doing a thing versus what is the actual outcome, right? Like, what is the result of the thing, not what is the thing. And that, going back to the Agile Manifesto, that is essentially why they said working software over thorough documentation, right? Like, it might be awesome to have lots of documentation, but like what value does that actually provide, right? So like when you're thinking about what you're doing, is there a way that you can shift the focus from what it is that we actually do to what it is the outcome? And this is one of the things that we talk about within BASE even, and even in our 30-day challenge, is like helping assistants to move into a more strategic position by aligning themselves with their executives' goals, right? Which is really about hopefully if your goals are written well or their goals are written well, it is about the outcome, not the output, right? Like what is the actual outcome of that thing? So if you're able to focus on that, that's going to be a step in the right direction. And then the second is, and this is from a different book that I read that was really good, but it was a Navy book and it was talking about submarines, but they said a little rudder, like the thing that guides the submarine, far from the rocks is a lot better than a lot of rudder close to the rocks. And what does that mean, right? Like, well, if you're really close to a rock and you push really hard on the rudder to try and get it to turn, it's going to be too late, right? But if you're far away and you just apply a little bit, you're going to be able to turn pretty easily. And so I think similarly with Agile, that really is like Agile, right? Like being able to get frequent communication to learn and adjust and shift, right? So can you take not just a continuous adjustment position from your own work, but from communication, right? Like again, within BASE, within the 30-day challenge, one of the things that we specifically advise and Natalie advises us to do is to ask your executive for feedback, right? Like say, I'm going to start this. I'd like some feedback on the information that I'm providing in here. Is this like, is there anything else that you would like to see? Is there something you're not seeing that is, or something that you would like to see that isn't in there? Is there something that's not as valuable to you that I should exclude, right? Like asking those questions can help you to apply, again, an Agile mindset to the sorts of things that you're doing to be able to understand, like, okay, I'm getting information, because then you're able to support them better, right? Like, and that requires like some level of dialogue, but that is going to ultimately help you to apply, like, again, an Agile type of mindset to some of the things that you're doing, and then specifically within BASE, right? Like there are some tools that can help you do that. So, yeah.
That's awesome. And I dropped the link for the 30-day challenge in both the chats so you guys can sign up there. And then in the follow-up email, I'll send one of the resources that comes with the challenge once you sign up. It's a quick 2-minute video of Natalie walking through what Jeremy just talked about, how she asked Paige the same questions every week, leveraging decision streams. So Beth, this answers your question. How you can use BASE to manage your work in an Agile framework. So I'll include that YouTube link, but make sure you still sign up for the challenge because that enters you into Natalie's, so I guess it's like a weekly newsletter, but it's more just tips on how you can use BASE to do just this. Yeah.
I also wanted to mention that if you're using BASE right now, one of the ways that this is going to get even easier is right now, probably many of the people on this call have already signed up for the Digest 2.0 private beta. We're going to be releasing that to public beta next week. So if you're not already on there, we're going to be, tasks will be able to be pulled into Digest, and more specifically commenting, right? And we've already seen this with a lot of our beta users. They're actually utilizing commenting with their executives directly to elicit this feedback, right? Like get feedback on what other things they want to see. So it's just a more dynamic and collaborative sort of space to be able to get that kind of stuff. So if you don't have access to that now, no need to request it. We're just making a couple of final tweaks based on some of the feedback that we've gotten over the past several weeks to make that, to increase the visibility of that commenting. Oh yeah, and notifications are super awesome. I'm really excited about that. I was testing out some stuff this morning and shared something internally. So I'm excited. You'll be seeing that next week if you aren't already in the beta.
Awesome. Love it. Okay, I think we got through the current questions in the chat. If you want to move on to the next part, and then we'll just keep doing the same thing, guys. Ask questions. If Jeremy doesn't get to it while he's presenting, I'll save them for Q&A.
Yeah, well, more or less, I've covered the stuff that I wanted to cover, but I'll add one more thing. But if you want to look and see if there are any other comments, in terms of Agile in practice, I think that there are two rituals that if you aren't using them in some way, shape, or form, I think are very broadly applicable to many different work types. And those are stand-ups and retrospectives. So as I mentioned, I'll kind of briefly cover those again. Stand-ups, the intent and purpose of those is to frequently get frequent check-ins on on the work that is in process, identify things that are blocking that work, and make sure that we still want to continue down this path, right? So that's one. And then retrospectives are a time to, essentially postmortems. There's lots of different names, but ways of going like what went well, what didn't go well, what can we improve the next time, right? Or what should we keep doing the next time, right? Those sorts of things. They work in any kind of context. And I think that stand-ups so I've seen them done in not just in tech, in software development, but in recruiting, right? Like in sales, in many other areas. And they're really, really valuable. And I think some of the key tenets should be the purpose is not just to report status, right? It's not about reporting status, even though sometimes it can feel that way. And if it's feeling that way, maybe we should ask the question of why are we doing this, right? Like it is about, being able to state clearly, here's what I'm working on, or here's what I worked on, here's what I'm going to work on, and here's something that might prevent me from being able to do it. Or if not, great, right? Like I'm able to move forward without any issues, right? Because a lot of times, especially as your organization gets larger, depending on the size, it's easy for those things to get like pushed down, right? Like to not be aware. So I would suggest whether you're working with other teams or even within your own admin teams, right? Like we have many groups that have handfuls or many admins, right? But maybe within your group of kind of 5, get together with them on a frequent basis and ask them like, what are you working on? What do you like get some collaboration going, and then do a retrospective with them, right? Because oftentimes I find that pain points that one person or one group of people is frequently facing, others are too. And if that hasn't been bubbled up and surfaced, like everyone is struggling with the same problem over and over and over. So like if we just took a little bit of the capacity of the next sprint to address those pain points, we would create a more sustainable work environment for ourselves and a more impactful one, more outputs for those that we're working for. Again, this is one of the reasons why Agile came about. And I think those are really valuable things regardless of what you're doing.
Awesome. We have one of our viewers would like to know if there are any books that you would suggest on Agile.
Well, so these are going to be pretty in-depth, but if there's one that I really like, let me just grab it so you can see it. Hold on.
Yeah, go ahead. And I'll make sure to note, guys, the titles and all that, and I'll provide links in the follow-up email so y'all have access to that too.
Clearly I wasn't prepared, but this is called The Scrum Revolution. It's by AJ Reddy. Okay. And it's really, really good. Now it's pretty in depth, but like you can see all the things that I marked up in here. I have so many notes in this book. I actually got to work with AJ in a former organization. He did some consulting work, his organization with us, but it's very, very good. It basically looks at what are the best things within Scrum and Kanban and how to apply them in different scenarios, in different project management from different teams, how to do project prediction. It's nerdy. I'm not gonna lie. I mean, it's like project management nerdy stuff, but I found it really, really interesting. And if you're really interested in like how to do stuff well, like the Project Z curve, this is pretty advanced kind of project management sort of stuff, but thinking about what percentage of work is done in what period of time, the vast majority of work is done at a fairly constant rate, but the beginning and the ending parts usually take way longer. So if you know that and you can predict that and you can create some numbers around that, you can create an appropriate buffer that actually allows you to be more effective at estimation, which is really, really valuable in a lot of ways. So anyways, this is called the Scrum Bond Revolution. I've been through, there's another one, there's a green one up there somewhere that I can't see right now. Oh, that one's just called Kanban. Yeah, that one's pretty good too, but I really like this one.
Okay. I'll drop the link in for you guys. We also had a question submitted ahead of time on, and if this gets down a rabbit hole, you can just be like, Liz, we're not doing that. But someone would like to know about Shape Up and if that's
Shape Up,
similar, different, or
yeah. So okay, yeah, slight rabbit hole, but I'll go down that rabbit hole for just a minute.
Okay.
So for those that are, I actually know a lot of people that are doing Shape Up. So Shape Up is I would say Shape Up is an agile system. Shape Up is specifically, for those that don't know, it's made by a company. It was created by Basecamp. Basecamp is the makers of Basecamp, Signal 37, Signal something. Sorry. They have done. They've written a lot of different stuff. They're pretty impactful organization and group of people. But they created Shape Up, and basically it utilized a lot of the same agile things, but it basically says 6-week periods. Within a 6-week period, it gives a lot of autonomy to the project teams that are operating within it, and says, we are going to figure out a way to deliver this in 6 weeks. Right now, it's fundamentally that is Scrum, right? Like 2-week sprints, but the reason why Shape Up has come about is because there are many Scrum teams that don't deliver all the things that they intend to deliver. And Scrum is intended to be, this 2 weeks, we will deliver these X number of things, right? Like that is the commitment. It's actually one of the reasons I don't do pure Scrum. We do Scrum Bond, because if you're working in a really dynamic environment, it's extremely difficult to predict what other things are going to come up that you need to do, especially if you're operating a product like software, right? Alerts come up, stuff breaks, you have to fix it because you need to keep it running. That makes it really hard to be really accurate in predictions. But Shape Up, so Scrum sometimes can suffer from that. And so Shape Up is meant to kind of handle that and say, I'm going to give my teams autonomy to make decisions about what things really are a priority, what are secondary priorities, but within that period of time, and 6 weeks I think is the most common one, we're delivering that to our users, period. So I have 2 friends who are engineering leaders in other organizations that have seen great success with Shape Up and moving their organizations to that. I know it's also an effective system, but yeah, it is a kind of, let's say, a hybrid agile kind of model.
Okay, gotcha.
Oh yeah, somebody found the link. Yeah, Basecamp Shape Up.
Yeah, I dropped that in there for you guys so you have it. So I think this next one would be a good one to wrap everything up on.
Okay.
I'll drop it up here for everyone to see. So agile seems to be a behavioral mindset. Is there a checklist or guide to make sure you're following, or how do you recommend everyone moves forward if they want to apply this to their workflow today?
Yeah, absolutely. It is. I mean, it fundamentally is a mindset. So Agile came about via the Agile Manifesto, right? At the beginning of this call, I kind of went through those: individuals over processes, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change over following a plan. So this is Agile Manifesto. I think it's agilemanifesto.org. It's a really old and kind of clunky website, but it's literally just some words on a page with a picture in the background. But you can also drill into the principles, the agile principles, which just fall off of this manifesto. And we'll post this in our in the feed and in our Facebook channel. But I think some of those principles are really valuable, right? Like fundamentally, again, the key attributes of this are creating agility in your process, creating sustainability for the people who are doing it, delivering value frequently, whatever that looks like, collaboration, like tight collaboration with those you're working with and with those that you're delivering to, right? Whatever that looks like. And then having a continuous growth mindset. I mean, fundamentally, those are the kind of key attributes and the mindsets that I think you can take and apply and you'll be like generally operating within the bounds of what Agile is meant to do. The inverse of that would be strict adherence, almost like dogmatic adherence to a plan that was established, right? Like lack of agility, and making sure that you at least check the box of what that looks like, which ultimately usually ends up in like really long hours at the end of a project, just to deliver something that may not be valuable, not delivering frequently, and just doing your own work. Like, here's my part to the thing, throw it over the wall. And we never really talk about it. So those, like, that continuous growth doesn't happen. Like, that's the inverse. And I think everybody, when they look at that on the surface, would say that's generally bad. But sometimes people forget to look inwards and say, what are we doing and what framework is causing this to occur? So that's all I got. Hopefully,
that's it, guys.
That's all I got. Hopefully this has been valuable. I've enjoyed it because I think it's fun. I think it's cool. But yeah, hopefully it's valuable. Let me say this: if you take something from this and you find it valuable in your own work processes, working with your teams, working with your executive, please share it with us. I'd love to hear, mostly because I'm just curious. Like, does this work as well as I think it does for other functional areas? And it's been a lot of fun. And if so, I'm happy to dive into other topics that are similar in the future that might be useful.
Yeah, this has been great. We'll do, I mean, you guys drop it. I think we came about this one just in the Facebook group.
Yeah.
So just drop it in a post, or you can drop it in the comments here, or email me, liz@basehq.com, and we'll work these topics in. As you know, we try to get a couple of these base lives in per week. Before we head out, I want to make sure you guys, if you haven't already, sign up for our free summit on March 10th. I dropped the link in the chat. This is going to be awesome, you guys. If you were at our Empower 2020 summit last October, we had a jam-packed day. We're going to be running sessions from 9 to 5. And yes, the agenda will be coming out either this afternoon or tomorrow morning at the latest, you guys. I just want to make sure it's all perfect and organized for everybody. So that'll be coming out within the next 24 hours, so you can plan your days. But per the usual, we will have all the recordings available. So if you have to hop out last minute, or if you can't come in a certain time, if you register for the summit, you'll have access to all of those. Jeremy, you're the best. Thank you so much for doing this. This was so valuable. I think I speak for everyone here. And yeah, we'll see you guys at the next Base Live event.